Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business. My dad ran the local hardware store, and my mom made our home a warm and welcoming place. I had an older sister who, despite the usual sibling squabbles, always had my back. Life was simple then, helping out at the store, playing sports with friends, and learning the values my parents emphasized: hard work and honesty. For a while, my life felt straightforward, predictable even. But everything shifted when I left for a prestigious all-boys private school. My parents believed strongly in the power of education, and they were willing to sacrifice to give me the best shot at success. That school opened my eyes to a world I hadn't encountered before. A world of privilege, power, and sharp social divides. As a middle-class kid surrounded by wealthy classmates, I became a target for snide comments and outright bullying. Verbal jabs escalated to physical fights, and it wasn't long before I learned to stand my ground. It was during this turbulent time that I met Greg Sands, or Sandman, as everyone called him. A scrappy, talented boxer who would end up changing my life. Greg was the son of a local cop, and like me, he knew what it felt like to be underestimated. After sparring in the ring one afternoon at the police boys club, we went from opponents to best friends. Greg's toughness and loyalty were unmatched. He also attended my school, thanks to his dad's connections, and together we faced down the bullies who made our lives difficult. One day, things reached a breaking point. A particularly nasty kid named Douglas made a crack about my family, and I lost it, broke his nose and knocked out a couple of teeth. Greg had my back as always, and we dealt with the rest of Douglas's crew. But messing with someone like Douglas Peterson, a rich kid with a powerful father, came with consequences. Douglas's dad, a prominent businessman, got us suspended for the remainder of the year and even tried to press charges. Thankfully, Greg's dad and a few witnesses from the neighboring girls' school helped clear our names. Though we avoided legal trouble, the suspension stuck, and Douglas's father demanded my parents pay for his son's medical bills. That summer, I kept my head down, working at my dad's hardware store and hitting the gym with Greg. Life carried on. We cruised around town in our cars, flirted with girls from the neighboring school, and even had a few run-ins with Douglas, who never forgave me for that fight. He thrived on making others miserable and sought revenge by dating Susan Bates, a girl I had once been involved with. He thought it would hurt me, but it didn't. By then, Susan and I were just a distant memory. Greg and I started thinking about life after high school. College wasn't an option for me. My family couldn't afford it, so we decided to enlist in the Army. We missed prom while we were away at basic training, but that didn't bother us. Greg thrived in the military environment, aiming for special forces, while I realized I was more interested in finishing my initial commitment and earning a degree. After basic, Greg and I parted ways for the first time in years. He was deployed to dangerous areas, and though I worried about him, I knew he could handle himself. Meanwhile, I completed officer training, earned my business degree, and settled into life as Second Lieutenant Roger Easton, assigned to the Army History Unit. It was office work, but I enjoyed learning about military history and traditions, thanks to a sharp, experienced sergeant who took me under his wing. As the years passed, I dated here and there but hadn't found anyone I truly connected with, until everything changed. One weekend, I returned to my hometown for a music festival. My plan was simple: visit my parents, catch up with Greg's folks, and reconnect with old friends over a few beers. That Friday night, I learned a lot had changed. My dad was thinking about selling the hardware store and retiring, and Greg's dad, now the police chief, hadn't heard from Greg recently, due to the classified nature of his missions. The next morning, after my run and breakfast, I helped my dad open the store. That's when I ran into Susan Bates, now Susan Peterson. She was back in town for the festival with her cousin, Kelly. Susan mentioned that Douglas was overseas on business and introduced me to Kelly, a stunning, bright-eyed woman who caught my attention immediately. Later that evening, we met up at the festival. Susan, already tipsy, flirted with anyone in her path, leaving Kelly looking uncomfortable. I joined them, bought us some drinks, and endured Susan's rambling about her life with Douglas. a marriage that, by the sound of it, had been far from a fairy tale. Eventually, Susan wandered off with another guy, leaving Kelly and me alone. We spent the rest of the night talking, laughing, and realizing how much we had in common. Kelly worked as a human resources manager at Peterson Corporation, thanks to Susan's connections. We ended that first night exchanging numbers and quickly set up a date for the following week. Things progressed fast between us, and after nearly 2 years of dating, we had grown very close. Kelly was traditional and wanted to wait until marriage before having sex, which, while frustrating, ultimately deepened our emotional bond. Despite occasional encounters with Susan and the lingering shadow of Doug Peterson, we made it work. Kelly's parents, though wealthier, welcomed me into their lives. Her father, a retired general, especially warmed to me after we found common ground through our shared military background. After I completed my degree, I proposed to Kelly, and she said yes. Her father gave his blessing, though her mother was less enthusiastic. Likely influenced by Doug, she insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Still, the wedding went smoothly. Sandman couldn't attend, but his younger brother stepped in as my best man. Thankfully, Doug was overseas, and the day went off without a hitch. Even better, Kelly and I soon discovered that we were as compatible in bed as we were out of it. Life unfolded as expected. We bought a house in a good neighborhood and started planning for our future. We both wanted kids, but first, I had to decide whether to remain in the army or transition to civilian life. We agreed it was time for me to use my degree, so I began searching for a new career. I got lucky and landed a job at a major bank overseeing internal and external security. The pay was double what I'd made in the army, so I left military life behind. With that stability in place, we started trying for children, but nothing happened. After a visit to the doctor, I learned the hard truth. I was sterile. The news was devastating, and I struggled to find the right time to tell Kelly. I planned to break it to her during a surprise cruise, but before I had the chance, she came home with news of her own. She'd been promoted and would be traveling with Doug Peterson, her boss, on an upcoming business trip. I had a bad feeling. Doug had a reputation, and while I kept my concerns to myself, the thought of him spending time alone with my wife gnawed at me. Kelly reassured me that Doug had changed and that everything would be strictly professional. Still, the morning she left, I felt uneasy. Doug pulled up in a limo, grinning like a fox, and they drove off together. I spent the next few days stewing, trying to shake my doubts. Kelly called occasionally, telling me everything was fine. But that Saturday morning, my focus shifted when there was an unexpected knock at the door. It was Sandman. He looked tougher, more world-weary, but that's what war does. We hugged, grabbed a couple of beers, and caught up. Sandman had left the army after 10 years, fed up with what he called the liquidating. I updated him on my life, including Kelly's connection to Doug. We laughed about how Susan had ended up married to him, though the humor faded as Sandman recognized Kelly's father from my wedding photos. Turns out General Bates had once been Sandman's commander in Special Forces. Sandman also dropped a bombshell about Kelly's mother, revealing that she'd had affairs with several officers, a scandal that had led to the general's early retirement. That revelation left me uneasy, questioning the family I'd married into. Before Sandman left, I invited him to stay the night, but he had to get going. He promised to visit again when Kelly got back. The week flew by, with work keeping me distracted, and by Friday night, Kelly was home. She seemed like her usual self, and we spent the night reconnecting. The next day, I told her about Sandman's return and suggested we all meet up. When Sandman arrived with flowers and wine, I was about to introduce them when Kelly suddenly gasped, "Oh my God, Greg, you're Sandman?" "Hi, Kelly. Good to see you," Sandman replied, cool as ever. I was floored. Turns out, Kelly and Sandman already knew each other. They'd met years ago at the army base where her father was stationed. Not only that, but they dated, with the general's full approval, until Sandman's deployment to Iraq ended things. As they caught up, I felt like a third wheel. While cooking dinner, I overheard Kelly say something that sounded like, "Does he know?" When I asked what they meant, they both clammed up and looked awkward. After dinner, Sandman left, saying Kelly and I needed to talk. She explained that her relationship with Sandman was ancient history and assured me that she loved only me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I called Sandman, and he apologized, saying he hadn't wanted to stir up old issues. I accepted his explanation, but tension lingered. Life carried on, with Kelly busier than ever in her new job. We put our plans for kids on hold, and I didn't bring up my sterility. Meanwhile, Sandman became a cop and joined the drug task force, nicknamed the Pill Squad. At home, things started to change. Kelly worked late and traveled with Doug more often, and our once vibrant sex life dwindled. My suspicions grew, though I kept them to myself. Needing time to think, I decided to help my dad close his store as he prepared for retirement. Kelly supported the idea, saying she'd be swamped with work anyway. At the store, my dad surprised me by offering advice. Gently, he suggested I protect myself, hinting at rumors he'd heard about Kelly's behavior. He told me Doug had been bragging around town about sleeping with my wife 3 times a week. Hearing that knocked the wind out of me. It's one thing to suspect something. It's another to have it confirmed. Furious, I decided to confront Susan Peterson directly. I drove to her parents' estate, where she was staying, and asked her point-blank, "Is Doug sleeping with my wife?" Susan looked stunned. "You don't mess around, Roger," she said. "Well, it's all over town," I replied. She broke down in tears and admitted that her marriage to Doug had been doomed from the start. Forced into it after a shotgun wedding, they had resented each other for years. Doug cheated openly, even keeping an apartment near his office for his affairs. Out of spite, Susan started having affairs of her own. Things had recently come to a head when Doug bragged about his relationship with Kelly, saying it was only a matter of time before she moved in with him. That was Susan's breaking point, and why she'd finally left. As I listened, my sympathy for Susan faded. I was beyond that now. Susan was determined to make Doug pay, but I had my own revenge to plan. We wished each other well, though I hoped it would be the last time we spoke. When I got home, my parents were out, and Kelly had left a note saying she needed to talk urgently. Ignoring her calls, I grabbed a beer and sat out on the deck, stewing in my frustration. My parents returned later, and after a few more beers, I headed to bed. The next morning, I woke to the comforting smell of breakfast. I had a quiet meal with my folks before heading to the store for the final handover. After lunch, Dad and I went fishing, and I confided in him. He listened patiently, then nodded. "You need to confront this head-on," he said, and I knew he was right. When we got back, Kelly's BMW was in the driveway. Inside, she sat on the couch, clutching tissues, having clearly already spoken with my mom. Sensing the tension, my parents quickly excused themselves to give us privacy. As soon as they left, Kelly broke down. Through tears, she explained that Susan had called her, saying she was divorcing Doug and letting slip that I knew about Doug's so-called late meetings. Panicked, Kelly had driven straight to my parents' house to talk. She swore up and down that she wasn't having an affair. According to her, the late meetings with Doug had been legitimate, and Susan was spreading rumors to break us up. She even promised to stop attending those meetings altogether. Her story sounded rehearsed, and I didn't buy it. I knew Susan didn't love me, Doug hated me, and the Bates women had a reputation for cheating. In that moment, I realized Kelly was no longer my partner. She was my enemy, but I needed proof before I confronted her. So, I put on an Oscar-worthy act pretending to forgive her. I smiled, told her everything would be okay, and even took her out to dinner. By the next morning, she seemed happy and relieved, blissfully unaware of my suspicions as she left for work. The moment she was gone, I sprang into action. I called Sandman and asked for his help with surveillance. I also asked my dad to tell Kelly I was staying until Sunday, buying myself more time to gather evidence. After packing my car, I said my goodbyes and drove back to the city. Sandman still hadn't returned my call, but I wasn't worried yet. I checked into a hotel far enough from anyone Kelly or I knew, then went to the bank. There, I opened a new account in my name and transferred half of our joint savings, ensuring that my future paychecks would also be deposited there. Feeling a bit more secure, I returned to the hotel and tried calling Sandman again. Still no answer. I headed down to the bar for a beer and struck up a conversation with the bartender until my dad called to check in. After a few more beers, I decided to call it a night, paid my tab, and went back to my room to shower and change. Just as I was about to leave for a late lunch, Sandman finally called. "Sorry for the delay," he said. "I just got promoted to detective." We agreed to meet at a local cop hangout. At the bar, we found a booth, ordered beers, and got down to business. I told him everything. The rumors about Kelly and Doug, the late meetings, and Kelly's sudden change in behavior. Sandman listened quietly, then joked, "You want me to kneecap him?" We laughed, but then the conversation turned serious. We needed hard evidence of the affair, and Sandman promised to handle it using his connections. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover but followed Sandman's advice. Act normal. I canceled my leave and told Kelly I'd be home that night. She welcomed me warmly, and over dinner, she suggested we start a family. I nodded, playing along, even though I knew it was pointless. I was sterile. I said nothing, waiting for Sandman's update. Weeks passed, and I grew more anxious. When Kelly questioned the balance in our joint account, I told her I'd lent some money to my dad. She seemed satisfied with that explanation. Finally, in early December, Sandman called. "Meet me at the bar," he said. When I arrived, he handed me an envelope. "Good news," he said with a grin. Inside was the private investigator's report. Cleared Kelly. She had been faithful, just living her routine life. Doug, on the other hand, was a mess. Embroiled with multiple women, gambling, and pills. Sandman revealed that Doug was about to be busted for cocaine possession, and his downfall would make headlines. Felt like the perfect Christmas gift. I bought a round for the bar, then headed home to my wife. Sandman promised to visit over the weekend. When I walked through the door, Kelly practically tackled me, and we had the most passionate, intense sex we'd had in months. Afterward, she leaned in close and whispered, "You're going to be a father." I froze. Kelly mistook my shock for excitement and smiled, happily sharing her pregnancy news. She explained that she'd wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell me. She started talking about the nursery, the baby shower, and maternity leave, but I barely heard her. My mind was spinning, and a cold realization settled over me. The baby couldn't be mine. I was sterile. I lay there in stunned silence, watching her drift off to sleep, while anger boiled inside me. I couldn't believe she thought she could pass off another man's child as mine. Unable to stay in bed, I went downstairs to my study. For a fleeting moment, I even considered using my weapon, but I quickly dismissed the thought. I needed a plan, not a prison sentence. My entire life was built on lies. Kelly was a cheater. Sandman had betrayed me. Doug was just a pawn. Surrounded by enemies, I knew I had to play this smart. I needed to act like everything was fine while I figured out my next move. And my first move? Reach out to Doug Peterson. The next morning, I left early and called Doug's office, leaving an urgent message. By mid-morning, it was clear he wasn't going to call back. I didn't want to risk going to his office and being seen by Kelly or her colleagues, so I decided to follow him instead. I rented an SUV and waited outside his office. When Doug left, I discreetly followed him to an apartment building. Seizing the moment, I pulled up, grabbed him, and drove off. Doug was terrified, convinced I was going to kill him. I assured him I just wanted to talk. We drove to a secluded spot by the lake, where I handed him the report Sandman had compiled. As Doug read it, he muttered, "This is all lies." Then, as if on reflex, he blamed Susan. "This isn't from Susan," I told him. "It's from Greg Sands." Doug paled, realizing he was in far deeper trouble than he'd thought. Instead, I threw Doug off balance by saying I didn't believe most of the report, except the part about him cheating on his wife. Then I dropped another bombshell. We needed to help each other. Doug wasn't the reckless playboy painted in the report. He was just a pawn, a weak figurehead controlled by his father. But even pawns can be taken out, and Doug was still vulnerable. I leaned in and told him he needed to leave town immediately. Sandman was planning to frame him with pills and get him arrested. Doug blinked in confusion, clearly struggling to process why I was helping him and why Sandman would target him. I didn't have all the answers, but I needed his father's connections to dig into Sandman's background. Doug hesitated, but after a tense moment, he picked up his phone and called his father. They exchanged a few terse words before Doug handed me the phone. After some initial resistance, Mr. Peterson Sr. grudgingly agreed to provide a full report on Sandman within a few days. Doug asked me again why Sandman was doing this, and I gave him the only explanation that made sense. It was personal. We waited in uneasy silence until his father's men arrived to escort him away. I knew this move would derail Sandman's plans and buy me some time to figure out my next steps. Once Doug was gone, I returned to the city, dropped off the rental car, and decided to lay low. Needing space from the chaos, I accepted a 2-week assignment from work that involved visiting regional offices. Kelly wasn't thrilled about my sudden departure, but when I reminded her I needed to stay on my boss's good side, especially with a baby on the way, she reluctantly backed off. The trip passed quickly, but I couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at me. Repeated attempts to reach Mr. Peterson Sr. for the report went unanswered, leaving me in limbo. On the last day of my trip, a courier delivered a thick, sealed package. Inside was the long-awaited report on Greg Sands. I holed up in my hotel room and read through it, pausing more than once to pour myself a whiskey as the unsettling details sank in. The Greg Sands I had known at 18 was long gone. What remained was something far darker. The report outlined his violent childhood, which included witnessing his mother's murder. His father and stepmother had tried to control his rage by enrolling him in boxing, where he eventually rose to become a champion. But the discipline that might have saved others only sharpened Greg's dangerous edge. Then came the revelations that tied everything together. When Sandman joined the army, his path intersected with Edward Bates, Kelly's father, who commanded his unit. Their relationship was volatile from the start. Bates was ruthless, driven by power, while Sandman believed in protecting his men at all costs. The biggest source of conflict? Kelly. At first, Sandman's interest in Kelly was just a way to spite Bates. But it quickly deepened into something real, fueled by Kelly's resemblance to Sandman's late mother. When Sandman proposed, Kelly refused, saying she needed her father's approval. After that, things unraveled fast. Bates retaliated by sending Sandman's unit on a series of increasingly dangerous missions, culminating in a disastrous operation that left several soldiers dead and Sandman badly wounded. Bates retired in disgrace, and Kelly ended things with Sandman, choosing loyalty to her father over love. Sandman never forgave her or Bates. When he learned I was marrying Kelly, he saw an opportunity to exact revenge. He left the military, became a cop in my city, and laid the groundwork for a long, calculated takedown. His plan was simple: seduce Kelly, get her pregnant, and destroy the Bates family's reputation. Doug Peterson was just a tool, a means to an end. But by helping Doug escape, I'd thrown a wrench into Sandman's carefully crafted scheme. I knew it was only a matter of time before Sandman came after me. I needed to act fast. My first move was to get Kelly out of town, hoping it would keep Sandman distracted long enough for me to figure out my next steps. But when I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Our dog was gone, and Kelly's clothes were missing. In the kitchen, I found a note saying she had a business meeting and that the dog was with my parents. It felt like a flimsy excuse, and I couldn't shake the feeling she was with Sandman. To confirm my suspicions, I called the police station and learned Sandman was on a 2-week vacation. My mind raced. Was I just being paranoid? Or was something more sinister at play? Desperate for answers, I called Peterson Sr. To my surprise. He picked up. "What do you want, trailer trash?" he sneered. "I got the report," I replied, ignoring the insult. "Then why are you wasting my time?" he snapped. "I'm trying to find Kelly," I said. He chuckled darkly. "How's married life treating you?" Then, as if savoring the moment, he added, "She's at a meeting with Brett White, the temporary CEO." Relieved but still uneasy, I thanked him and hung up. Before I could dwell on it, Peterson couldn't resist one last jab. "No doubt White's giving her the bedroom tour." His words hit harder than I expected. Even though Kelly had technically told the truth, I still felt like a fool. The next morning, I woke up with one thought. I was done. Done with the lies, the games, the endless cycle of betrayal. I was going to divorce Kelly and move on. Let Sandman have the Bates clan. I wanted no part of their toxic web. But just as I was starting to feel a sense of clarity, everything unraveled again. Kelly called, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to fake affection. After a shower and some coffee, I headed to work, where I made an appointment with a lawyer and cleared out our joint bank accounts. I wanted my assets liquid and easily accessible in case I had to make a quick exit. Then, at 10 a.m., my world shattered. A courier delivered a small package with handwriting I recognized instantly. Inside was a videotape and 2 notes. One simply said, "I know," scrawled in what looked like dried blood. The other was a newspaper clipping. Peterson Corporation's CEO found dead. Doug Peterson had been discovered on a remote beach. His death officially ruled a homicide. I didn't need to watch the tape. I already knew what it contained. Doug's confession. Thanks for listening. This story isn't over yet, and things are about to get even more intense. Stay tuned for the next part to see what happens next.